I sense there's a larger feeling of optimism after listening to you five than the previous session in many ways. And Christian, you mentioned how well, you did use the term, the irony of it all, that the tragedy in the Ukraine is actually an opportunity to accelerate the shift and the transition. Do you agree with him in that, the rest of the panel? Jon Olav?
Yes, I think the tragedy with Ukraine, to me it's sort of, okay, it doesn't change anything. It's the same. We need to go to do the same transition. We need to cut CO2 emission. We need to develop more renewables. The fact that we can no longer use gas from Russia means we need to speed up, but it is essentially more of the same.
And it could be positive as long as we don't introduce then the other fossil fuels. In many ways. Kathrine?
Yeah, I prefer to be optimistic on this part of the tragedy. And I think the signals that we've seen from the EU just the last couple of weeks in general, but also in the energy area, I believe that will turn into fast forwarding of investments in the renewable sector. I believe specifically offshore wind, so this is good for both of us. I think we will also see more solar, more so not connected to the grid, rooftop, etc. Heat pumps. I think there are quite a few things you can do that now will get this maybe be incentivized to come in. But we will also see that we do need to secure energy over the next winter or winters. So we will probably also see some thermal being kept for longer than we had originally expected. So a little bit of both.
Several of you were describing quite ambitious targets when it comes to producing new energy and specifically electricity. And you, Niklas, were talking about a massive use of wind power. What government policy would you give you, that is both for hydro and LKAB and for Statkraft maybe, what government policy would give you the strongest incentive to speed up deployment of low carbon technologies? Who wants to start? Niklas.
Yeah, I can say that basically today we think we have incentives for speeding this up. With high prices of price for carbon in Europe, and it depends a bit on the CBAM and how it's introduced. But is there an echo?
Not for us, but maybe for you.
Okay. Oh, good. Then I can continue, and I'll stand for it. But it's more about how do you manage to speed up the electricity production and the deployment of new wind power. And I think that changes with the geopolitical situation today, where people are more accepted into that this change is we're gonna feel it. We're not gonna be able to transform into a climate effective society without it being noted. If we're looking at doubling electricity production in our countries, we're going to see it, we're going to feel it, but we need to do that. And that is something I see that is changing now in Europe and speeding up. But it will mean that we need drastic changes to mostly our application processes, on how to be able to actually introduce this physically.
Yeah, I'm just waiting to see if there are indexes. Yes, Christian, go ahead.
I think what we are up to now is that in Europe, it has changed from being a purely environmental concern and a concern for how to avoid a climate disaster. It has turned from that point on to say how can we stop buying energy from Russia. In Germany, they call it freedom energy, the renewable energy they produce themselves or import from other places than Europe, than Russia. So this can impact the speed of concession processes. It can bring a whole industry into an emotional mode, almost warlike. So I think in the aftermath of the enormous tragedy ongoing in Ukraine, it could be a speed that is quite unprecedented when it comes to driving change. It will still take time, but it could be compressed a lot. And this is an important time for everybody to make sure that we do what we can, each of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Kathrine.
No, I agree with that, and I think it's really the concessions, the framework will be important. And you, Jon Olav, you said, well, the EU will have 300 gigawatts, the UK will have 100 gigawatts. Norway, what do we know? So we need to set those targets, and we need to start to get going from the energy side. I think from the industry side, we are also concerned that we are in an area, we're competing on a global scene, but we are in a region where our production, relatively speaking, costs more because of the ETS system. So for the aluminium industry is this nerdy tool called CO2 compensation, which balances some of the extra cost we have in our power costs, despite using renewable energy, and that's an important tool for us also going forward as the world balances or equalizes at some point.
Well, then there's another dilemma here, which is when we are ramping up renewables, we also need to invest in infrastructure for bringing this electricity around. And that means we are getting into biodiversity issues, land use, sometimes also indigenous people's rights. How are you dealing with that dilemma in when you're talking about ramping up renewables? Because that is also a matter of deep concern to many. Jon Olav.
So I think I didn't have too much time on my last slide, but I think I had 3 advices. One is to take care of the environment. The other one is to engage the public. And the third one is to do it knowledge-based. And then, okay, that's easy. If you go on a slow pace, you can sort of, okay, we'll take our time, we'll do it, but we'll do it in a good order. Now we also have this urgency. And it's always been urgent, but now more urgent than ever. And I think there is a tendency that this sort of we need to take care of the environment, we need to engage with the public, we need to do it knowledge-based, is sort of also, I wouldn't call it a pillow or an excuse, but it is a tendency. I see that, okay, because of all that we need to slow down. But we cannot slow down. We need to speed up, and we need to put more resources into this. And that's, I liked actually the phrase that this is sort of a warlike feeling of urgency. It's exceptional what we can do when we really must. I remember when there was an issue with the ocean layer and the spray boxes, and you needed to. The industry was told you have to cut these gases from your spray boxes. They will be banned in 1 year. The industry said it's impossible, and 1 year later it was possible. So it's amazing what we can do if we just put targets. And I think the most important thing that government can do is to put clear targets in incentives and then say, okay, you should do it like this, and then people will do it like that.
I see Christian and Tilmann have raised their hands, so they're going to get a short comment. Christian first and then Tilmann.
What we just observed a few weeks ago is that in Ukraine, it was a plan to synchronize the electricity grid with Western Europe. That was planned to take more than a year. Well, when the invasion came, it was done in 2 weeks. This is the change of speed that we are talking about.
Tilmann.
Yes, that's a perfect example of just how many factors faster things are possible, right? The development or the finalization of the COVID vaccine, I think, was another perfect example of how mRNA technologies suddenly, very near the cusp of being implemented and now could be implemented. We see the same across a whole range of technologies for decarbonization. And at the same time, of course, we do need that scale and speed that requires sensitive intervention, right? Where we need to capture those timings where we...
Sorry, Tilmann, I have to ask, what is that noise? Because I was thinking either it's the wind blowing, that is a good thing, or you have a puppy, or is it a child somewhere?
That is actually an open window with a dog outside. Apologies.
Okay. Sorry, I mean, we were all wondering about that, I think.
That's home office for you. What I meant to say is the lucky situation that we're in right now, as we talk about steel, as we talk about our transmission lines and infrastructures, that across many parts of Europe, we are reaching points of basically end of life of many of those infrastructures, where now we have the opportunity to invest in the right renewal of these infrastructures and thereby make use of that time. If we now instead invest into the current setup of the fossil infrastructure, we'll have missed that and we'll have massive write-offs to deal with over the next years. So it's really a perfect timing to act boldly right now. As John said, science and fact-based, and with a massive communication campaign to make sure that people understand, right, that this is an incredible opportunity. Actually, this is not us going into frugality, but this could be a great opportunity for new wealth and new equality that happens. Right, it's a matter of also communicating.
In the program, this session is called Rapid Deployment, Behavior and Technology. And so far we've been talking a lot about technology. But I need you all to reflect a little bit on the behavioral aspect of it all. Because if we continue as we are, what potential is there in changing behavior? Or should we turn it all the other way around and look at, could behavior change our need for new electricity or new energy? Is there any way that we can participate in using energy in a better way, in a smarter way? Tilmann, you were at least touching upon it. And there is one question for you, Heb, specifically. What are real alternatives to electrifying transport? Does everyone need a personal vehicle? Can behavioral changes reduce the demand for transport? And maybe in other sectors as well, but I know that you're working with mobility, so maybe you would like to go there first.
I think it's important to keep in mind that we shouldn't kid ourselves that we'll always need cars if we want to maintain a similar lifestyle to what we have right now, right? If we want to have medium-sized cities that are interconnected with other cities, there will always be, or for the foreseeable future at least, will be applications for cars, and including private ownership or others. I think what we have seen also in COVID, in at least many German cities, but across Europe, I know, is that we can reimagine the way that we live in cities, especially where cars aren't ideal for use in cities. Really, they're very large. They create pollution and obviously also accidents. So much more than just CO2 emissions. And having the unilateral or strong focus on cars, including in urban areas, that we had in the last century is something that we should and must challenge in order to make sure that we get mobility done in an efficient way and a better way, right? And by rezoning cities like Barcelona and Paris have shown by making use of innovative pricing systems like in London, right, where you have road pricing systems, by making sure that we use those modes, use those technologies where they actually make most sense. It's a matter of being most productive with what we have, and it will work in many, many ways. And with that, we'll be able to reduce the demand for new battery materials, new charging infrastructure. And so it's a matter of a kind of blend of transitioning to the decarbonized technology to begin with, but of course also making sure that we, in the meantime, transition to a new mode of a system, and mobility is one of the systems that most expressed.
Thank you. Kathrine?
Well, as a mother of a vegan without a driver's license, there are behavioral changes that will take us in the right direction. But I think also in a larger scale, of course, I think we need to make the new energies, the new solutions, new materials, we need to make them available. We also need to make them affordable, which means that we need to start and we need to scale, and then we need to share that technology, because that's really where the cost of new technologies and new solutions are becoming available for a larger audience. And we need to partly incentivize consumers, so there's a reason why there are a lot of electric cars in Norway, is incentivized. But we also need to be demanding consumers. And as an aluminium producer, we deliver, for example, to the car manufacturers. And they are, if not seeing the light, at least they're starting to feel the heat from the consumers. So their demands to us as an aluminium producer, and I'm pretty sure to Niklas here as a steel producer, they are asking for low carbon footprint materials and zero carbon footprint materials, and they're asking for commitments. And I think also that public procurement is an area where we need to establish the markets, establish the demand for some of these products.
So the consumers do have a role in this and a specific power as well. I think it's time to involve the front row. And now last time I looked, that's 10 seconds ago, there were only one person pointing his name tag, but now there are several. So we're going to start with Aidan Cronin. You are a specialist at Siemens Wind Power. So I suspect that you are going to ask about wind, maybe? No? Go ahead.
No, not necessarily. I mean, everybody agrees we need something, and we need fast action.
Yeah.
And we have NATO for war. Do we need a NATO for energy? Would that be a way? Because now we have everybody. I mean, the buzzword is hydrogen. Everybody has their electrolyzer to play with, but that's not going to get our grids built. And it's a very nice excuse for policymakers to wait until the next election. So how can we actually streamline the planning in Western Europe, so that we say, okay, you take this bit, that will be built and delivered by that and that day, because we need some precision, and if we have precision, we also have investment confidence. And then to John Olav, good to see you in person again. I have a question for you. How fast, how many gigawatts do we need to put in a year in your view for offshore to start delivering properly? So, thank you.
Thank you. Jon Olav, the last question first.
Yeah, so that was a very specific, concrete question. So if you look at the European Commission, 300 gigawatts by 2050, 30 years, 10 gigawatts per year. For you,
is that feasible?
Yes, that's feasible. Land-based wind.
But how much is it going to cost?
Well, I'll come back to that. I'll just say that land-based wind globally is installed 50 gigawatts every year. And it's been done so for the last 10 years or so. So it's absolutely feasible to do this also offshore. It's just about ramping up. But of course there is a ramp up, and you don't get the industry to ramp up before they see clear targets, long-term targets to do that. And then we need to develop floating wind, because floating wind is really important in this equation. It will cost, if you look at the investment in Europe, we talk about around 1,000 billion euros until 2050 in investments, in that range. I cannot be more precise because there's cost developments and so on, but in that range.
Rather expensive, in other words. Tilmann, did you raise your hand?
What did you say?
Rather expensive.
Not really. It's immensely, it's a bargain. I mean, look at the cost of CO2 emissions. It's a bargain. It's not expensive. You shouldn't
And maybe that is what we're
word.
forgetting often as well when discussing prices, that what is the alternative? I think Tilmann was raising his hand first, then Kathrine and Christian. And NATO for energy. Is that something you would like to comment on, Tilmann?
I'm not sure that the wording is a particularly politically sensitive one. I leave that to the geopolitics debate in Vienna. But indeed, like a more consistent and aligned way of progressing that transition, especially in the infrastructure building, would of course be very useful. In the EU, in particular, one element that is of concern is the smart charging and bidirectional charging built out in order to make use of renewables in the electric vehicle segment most efficiently. And for that, it needs a harmonized electric market, or the harmonized car market in the EU. And that requires some political mandate there. So that indeed would be quite key. I think what, to the point of Ms. Tande right now on the price and whether it's expensive, a while back I worked with the Desertec Foundation. Maybe some of you remember 10 years ago, the idea of transferring large amounts of solar power from the Northern African Sahara to Europe, and it was basically shot down, also due to the price cost and the communication. That it was said it would cost 300 billion euros until 2030, which sounded like a lot of money. But if you think of it split across 20 years and across the entire European Union membership, that's really not a lot of money. And again, we need to revamp our infrastructures anyway and improve those, and so the marginal additional cost is actually much smaller than might appear on first glance.
Thank you. Kathrine, I think I misread your hand. Yeah, okay. It was an old hand. Christian?
I think consumers' choice is clearly needed, but it's not enough on its own. I think there is a need for political regulations. What we can expect is that the speed of political decision-making will be the most visible change after Ukraine. Our politicians around the world have trained themselves for 2 years of making decisions with large societal impact during the COVID. They are now in the EU about to do the same when it comes to energy, to be free of Russian energy. Also, the example of the ozone layer. We all remember that within a very short time it was abandoned to use the spray boxes with the type of gases that destroy the ozone layer, and it was fixed within very short time. Same with going from leaded to unleaded gasoline or high sulfur to low sulfur fuel oils. It was all done by regulations. It is very difficult for individual consumers around Europe or around the world collectively to change behavior quick enough. So regulations will be needed. I believe even more in people as voters than I do in people as consumers. But voters will elect politicians, and politicians will make much quicker decisions. So what we can expect is a much faster decision making. I don't think we need a NATO for energy, but we do have the EU, we have the United Nations, and in the UK they have a separate energy commission that is overruling or overlooking the governments, because the philosophy is that the climate change is so important that it cannot be left to the governments only. So there is a point there, but by and large we have the politicians we have, and they are going to make much faster decisions now than we were used to some years ago.
And we might add, we have the politicians that we choose to have. Niklas, I saw that you were raising a hand as well.
Yes, I will cut off my my sounds. You have to wave if you need the word again. I think it's extremely interesting to see these discussions about that we need the politicians to really speed up concession permitting processes. The states and governments need to take a stronger part in driving this and making the different interests and weigh them. And it's just our governments that can do that. Because what we see today in steel, like I said before, we have all the incentives. It's not a demand issue anymore, and then people as consumers, it's a supply issue. When are we able to change the supply chains in order to do this transformation? And then you need the electricity, you need the grids, and that has to go as fast as possible. We are not worried about demand anymore. We really see that if with scale, in the middle of the 30s, we will be able to make fossil-free steel probably at the same cost as you're doing steel today. So it's a little bit more expensive in the beginning, but if you drive this with scale, you can scale up and you can get the prices needed. So it's a lot about, I don't really like the wording of a NATO for energy as well, but what it asks for is the government takes a very smart role where you get more politics and fast politics in the way forward, and that we really do need.
Thank you. I think we're going back a little bit to the front rows, and I don't know who was first among these three gentlemen here, but you are all representing very different disciplines. So we have two economists and we have one professor of psychology. What to choose? I think I'm going to go for the professor of psychology first. So Christian Klöckner.
Yes, thank you. I would also have gone for me first. Yes.
Of course.
No, I want to follow up on the questions around citizens. I like to refer to people as citizens, not so much as consumers. And I agree with you, Christian, that the most important action that people can take is actually voting. But I also think that we are in an interesting situation now where energy citizenship is developing quickly. We see that the last couple of months have done a lot to how people refer to energy, and that's not only referring to like the economic part of it, but now, especially the last couple of weeks, energy has also become a matter of national security and resilience and all of that. And that is going down into the households. That is discussed there. We hear anecdotes from households where now energy transition is supported in a much different way than it was before. But what I'm concerned about is that the high energy prices suffocate the potential for people to invest into changes in their own future. So if the high energy prices consume up all you can spend, then you will vote the next time for the party that promises you the lowest energy prices possible. And that's most likely not a very reliable party. So I think we need to make sure that people, especially vulnerable people, have instruments, economic instruments available that put them in a position where they can actually change the energy consumption that they have based on structural reasons.
Yeah, thank you. Jon Olav, you wanted to comment right away.
Yeah, just very shortly. Of course, both in Europe and in Norway, we had very high energy prices lately, and we immediately saw the effect of that people that could afford it, they would invest in solar panels and heat pumps and other energy efficiency measures. And those that couldn't afford, they are just, losing on all ends. They have to pay more for the little electricity they spend, and they cannot afford to do anything to lower their electricity bill. So, but that I think is more a question of politicians needing to make a system to redistribute the income, because the governments make a lot of income because of the high electricity prices, and this income can be redistributed to the ones that need it.
Well, it's interesting that we now have two professors of economics that are wanting to say something. So I thought we should start with Reinhard Madlener.
Yeah, the early bird doesn't always catch the microphone. I have two issues to add to the discussion. I think accelerating transition has to do also with obsolescence and depreciation. And I was struck by Tilmann, who talked about the circular economy in the automobile context. My question to him is, you showed these impressive cost decreases for batteries and electric vehicles. How would those projections change if the automobile industry turns into a more circular economy? And the second question has to do with investments. We heard a lot from several talks about investment needs. A simple question: what are in your company the minimum return on investment demanded and the maximum payback periods allowed?
Thank you. So Tilmann first maybe, and then we can hear from the corporations afterwards.
Thank you. That's it's really an excellent question. To start with the graph that I showed on the effects or the potential effects of circular economy measures on vehicle batteries, that try to make exactly that point, right? By using the vehicle batteries, I mean, the largest, most expensive components of electric cars, several thousand euros, sometimes even five-figure value in these batteries, by using those most productively, not only in the material itself, but also in the grid, right? So through vehicle-to-grid integration, adding that business model, but also extending their life through a second life and stationary. And then, of course, also at some point, recycling, though that is really, to me, in the circular economy sphere, almost an afterthought of a kind of, hygiene factor to, of course, making that possible. And it is possible, about 90-95% purity, no stress, even today. But making use of that productively is so key in order to make that transition more affordable. And in fact, electric mobility as such in itself is a massive increase in productivity. You hear that you have the first Teslas that have hit 1 million kilometers with no problem at all, batteries lasting a lot longer than we initially thought. And it's in fact a concern, right, that the whole aftermarket is fearing for their lives, because ultimately electric cars need a lot less maintenance. I've heard values of 1/10 of the maintenance. And so yes, life extension and less resource consumption, less cost over lifetime is something that is really a feasibility, and I expect to happen just by virtue of that technological shift in the sector, which changes the economics of the entire business fundamentally, right? Because right now depreciation is so fast with vehicles, we all know it. You turn the key for the first time, your car lost 20% of its value, the next year another 20% of the value. Depreciation is so fast that the only way of making this viable is to sell many cars and have people service them by themselves. With electric cars, that changes, right? The car could become an asset to generate value over a long, long lifetime. And so we'll see a change in the automotive sector from basically consumer goods selling business model to more of an asset management model, like currently happening with planes, with trains, with trucks, right, the longer lasting assets. And so that is great news for the resource consumption, so circularity, resource productivity. It's a massive, an incredible sign also for the pockets of the citizens, both in Central Europe or Western world, but also long-term in the global South, right, where the costs for mobility are so prohibitive right now. If we can drop those and produce electricity decentralized in remote areas, battery electric mobility might be a real breakthrough for economies and societies to evolve even faster and more equitably.
Thank you, Tilmann. Reinhard, your second question was, what is the minimum return of?
Return on investment and payback periods.
Yes.
For any investments, there is a potential that we don't go for profitable investments because the company policy says a 10% or 12% return on investment is required. And the same applies to the patients in terms of payback periods. And I would just like to hear from the industry representatives what their rules are in their companies.
So who would like to go first? Hydro or, yeah, Statkraft.
Yes, I can answer that question. In Statkraft, we typically have a return requirement around 7%. Minimum requirement is around 5%, meaning it takes 20 years to get your money back. But nevertheless, we have earned a lot of profits on renewable investments because often we find that costs are so low that we earn the money back much faster than we expected when we made the investment. A few other comments is it's quite interesting in Norway, which has the highest percentage of electric cars per capita in the world, that now it takes more than a year to get a new electric car. So people are willing to pay more for a second-hand electric car than for a new car, just to get it. Further, I think that the requirements to make sure that we are investing in the green will be stimulated a lot, as I said, by politicians making requirements. But it is also important for people to influence the politicians. And I do agree that the high energy prices is a problem. In Norway, we can compensate because we are earning profits on high energy prices in total as a country. But for most countries in Europe and around the world, that is not the case. So politicians have to find a balance between measures that takes electricity costs down, while at the same time driving change towards more green development. And in the long run, and also in the medium term, renewable energy is the lowest cost option for new energy. So it coincides, but it cannot be financed unless people can afford the energy bill today.
That is true. Thank you very much. And actually, that is what we had time for.